If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe. We have battle reports, list videos, and other Warhammer 40K content every week. Thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by. This video, we are going to take a look at reserves, deep strike, and the Rapid Ingress CP rule. We will also go through the rules for the repositions. We will take a look at the exact written rules, then I will explain them to the best of my ability. There will be a lot of reading rules for this video, but I just want to make sure we have everything clear. There is a lot of confusion over these three rules, and rightfully so. I had to look at 3 different downloads from the Warhammer community website: core rules, commentary and updates, and the Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion. I know there is a new mission deck coming up, but there shouldn't be any changes to these rules in the new Tournament Companion that should change this video by too much. Let's start with what are reserves/strategic reserves. To put it simply, reserves are units that will start in the game off the board. These units can come back on the board during the game. Now that sounds simple, but there is a lot of rules that revolve around reserves. Let's really take a look at reserves, the rules as written, any changes or official commentary on reserves. We will discuss how we can use reserves in our game plan, then we will move on to the deep strike rule. Let's answer the confusing question of what is reserves and what is strategic reserves. The answer is not much, it would seem. Reserves from the rules commentary question: are limits placed on reserves and strategic reserves separate? Answer: strategic reserve units are also reserve units. As such, any restrictions placed on reserves by a mission pack, example Pariah Nexus or even that new mission pack coming up, also apply to strategic reserves. Arriving as reinforcements and strategic reserves: when a reinforcements strategic reserves unit is set up on the battlefield, it is said to have arrived as reinforcements from strategic reserves. We also have another rules commentary here. Can a unit in reserves be a target of a stratagem? Answer: yes, if all other requirements in the target section of that stratagem are met. Next, let's clear up the confusion of how many points can go in reserves. This is a confusing topic because we need 2 different rules documents to get the full answer. Let's take a look at the first part of the answer. This is from the core rules. Placing units into strategic reserves. Before the battle, when you are instructed to declare battle formations, you can select 1 or more units from your army to be placed into strategic reserves. The combined value of all the units you wish to place into strategic reserves before the battle cannot exceed 25% of your total points limit before your chosen battle size as chosen in the table below. Incursion, 250 points. Strike Force, 500 points. Onslaught, 750 points. Seems simple. There it is, written in the cool rules. But wait a minute, I've watched games or played games where my opponent for sure has put more than 25% of their army in reserves. Here is where the second part of the full answer comes into play, found in the Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion. No more than half of the units in your army can start the battle in reserves, and the points total of those units cannot be more than half of the points total of your army. Reserve units cannot arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round, excluding units placed into strategic reserve during battle. That right there is a reposition move, and we will go over that. Any reserve units that have not arrived on the battlefield by the end of the 3rd battle round count as having been destroyed, as do any units embarked within them. If we have a Land Raider with a bunch of Terminators inside of it, we don't bring that in by round 3, that Land Raider and those Terminators are gone. This also clears up the confusion about when we can arrive from reserves during Deep Strike, but we will cover that in more detail in the Deep Strike section of the video. Another question that may come up is, when do I declare which units are going into Deep Strike or reserves? At the start, during, or the end of the deployment? I do have the battle flow chart to the right here. We're going to look at 5 and 6 though. 5 is declare battle formations. In the bottom section of 5, you can see which of their units will start the battle in reserves. That is number 5, and number 6 is deploy armies. So that means you do have to choose what you're putting in Deep Strike or reserves before you start deploying your army. Let's take a look at the rules for actually bringing our units in from reserves. Once again, we did have to look at 2 different documents for this. From the core rules book, we have arriving from strategic reserves. Units that are placed into strategic reserves are called strategic reserves units and can arrive later in the battle during the reinforcement step of any of your movement phases except during the first battle round. Any strategic reserves units that are not on the battlefield at the end of the battle count as destroyed. strategic reserves units can arrive in the reinforcement step of your movement phase from the second battle round onward. Then we have the Pariah Nexus tournament rules. So this means anytime you're using the match play, so if you're using the cards, if you're at the tournament, you'll be using this Pariah Nexus rule set. And that's where a lot of this confusion comes from, where just people only have the cool rules book. They don't have any of these updated tournament companions, where it does give you different restrictions on reserves and different rules. So for the Pariah Nexus, reserve units cannot arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round, excluding units placed into strategic reserves during the battle, that being a reposition move. Any reserves units that are not arrived on the battlefield by the end of the third battle round count as having been destroyed, as do any units embarked within them. The core rules, you can stay in reserves until round 5. Pariah Nexus, you have to come in by round 3 or you will lose those units. Now let's talk about actually arriving from reserves. This is from the core rules. It explains exactly how far our units have to be from enemy units when they come in on the board from reserves. Reserve units that arrive must be set up wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge, but no models in those units can be set up within the enemy deployment zone. Starting from the third battle round, strategic reserve units that arrive must be wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge. That means in battle round 3, you can come into the opponent's deployment zone off of strategic reserves. In any case, strategic reserve units cannot be set up within 9 inches horizontally of any enemy models. All other rules that apply when setting up reserve units also apply when setting up reserve units. If you notice, reserves, strategic reserves, have to be within 6 inches of the battlefield edge. But wait, I've had a game where my opponent has used an ability called Deep Strike to drop their unit anywhere on the board as long as it was not within 9 inches, sometimes even 6 inches from my units. With that, now is a good time for us to move on to the Deep Strike part of the video. Deep Strike, what is it and how does it work? First, let's start by taking a look at what is Deep Strike. This was found in the core rules document. During the declare battle formation step, if every model in the unit has this ability, you can set it up in reserves instead of setting it up on the battlefield. If you do so in the reinforcement step of one of your movement phases, you can set this unit anywhere up on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy models. Now this is a pretty clear description on Deep Strike. Where the confusion comes from is what turn can we use Deep Strike? This is another topic that needs all 3 of the documents, core rules updates and commentary, along with the Pariah Nexus tournament companion. For the core rules, arriving from strategic reserves, units that are placed into strategic reserves are called strategic reserves units, and can arrive later in the battle during the reinforcement step of any of your movement phases except during the first battle round. Any strategic reserves units that are not on the battlefield at the end of the battle count as destroyed. Then we also have the core rules commentary where it says Deep Strike if a unit with the Deep Strike ability arrives from strategic reserves. The controlling player can decide if they want to set it up using strategic reserves, so 6 inches from the battle edge, where we can drop outside of 9 inches horizontally of any enemy unit. Then we have the Pariah Nexus reserve restrictions. No more than half the units from your army can start the battle in reserves, and reserve units cannot arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round. Any reserves that are not on the battlefield by the end of the third battle round count as destroyed. And that's where the confusion comes from, because in the core rules you can wait until turn 5 before you can bring your reserves down, but in the Pariah Nexus, so if you're using the match play, if you're using the cards, or you're in the tournament, you have to bring your reserves in by turn 3 instead. And what about if I have an ability that says I can come in from reserves in turn 1? Those abilities will overwrite the no turn 1 reserve rules. We can even use the Rapid Ingress Stratagem for 1 CP to Deep Strike in turn 1 if we have such an ability. An example is the Grey Knight's Enhancement, First to the Fray, where you can come in from reserves on turn 1. And from the rules commentary, we have if a unit from your army has a rule that allows them to be set up on the battlefield from reserves in the first battle round, can that unit be set up in the reinforcement step of your opponent's movement phase using the Rapid Ingress Stratagem? The answer, yes, unless the rule explicitly states that it applies in your movement phase, in which case it is prevented by the restrictions of out-of-phase rules. That means at the end of the opponent's movement phase in turn 1, you could use Rapid Ingress if you have those coming from reserves on turn 1 abilities on that particular unit. Deep Strike, your whole unit has to have it. you put that unit in reserves, and then in your reinforcement step of your movement phase, you can bring down that unit as long as it is outside of 9 inches of all enemy units. We can't do this turn 1 unless we do have some sort of ability that allows us to turn 1 Deep Striker coming from reserves on turn 1. If you're playing any games with the tactical cards or in a tournament setting, we do have to bring in our reserves by turn 3. Now that we have a good handle on the reserves, strategic reserves, and deep strike rules, let's take a look at the fantastic stratagem Rapid Ingress for 1 CP. The Rapid Ingress has been updated over the course of 10th edition. We do have the original here on the left. The updated version is on the right. For 1 CP, end of your opponent's movement phase, 1 unit from your army in reserves, your unit can arrive on the battlefield as if it were the reinforcement step of your movement phase. And if every model in that unit has the Deep Strike ability, you can set that unit up as described in the Deep Strike ability. There is some restrictions. You cannot use this stratagem to enable a unit to arrive on the battlefield during a battle round it would normally not be able to do so in. We can't use this on turn 1 unless that unit has a turn 1 Deep Strike or a turn 1 Arrive from Reinforcements ability. The reinforcement step is a 6-inch from the board edge deployment depending on the turn, or as the updated rule states, we can bring in a unit using the Deep Strike ability rules. The restriction in the stratagem keeps us from using this to bypass any of the reserve rules 6 inches from the board edges or Deep Strike. Some other common questions for Rapid Ingress are, can I use an ability or stratagem on a unit in the reserves? The answer is yes. Can I use a CP reduction ability on a Rapid Ingress stratagem? The answer is yes. Can I use Arrive on turn 1 abilities from reserves on Rapid Ingress? Yes. And below these questions are all the rules as written or some Q&A from the commentary, just to show we can use these things with Rapid Ingress. I think that covers about everything. Once we had the reserves and Deep Strike rules, Rapid Ingress was not as difficult to unpack. This is my bread and butter stratagem with my Custodes or any heavy melee faction. It allows us to bring in a unit in our opponent's turn, perfect for melee armies who can have a hard time getting up the board or threatening backline units. This can work great for shooting armies too. Need a way to deliver those close range, high damage guns? Rapid Ingress. A unit in reserves is great for keeping your opponent on their toes. It also keeps some of their units out of the fight if they have to screen their back lines. Rapid Ingress will keep your opponent on their toes in their movement phase as well. We want our units in reserves to force mistakes or plays from your opponent they do not want to do. They may want to push a big deadly melee unit down to take the center from you, but doing so will open up a hole for us to Rapid Ingress a unit and steal their home objective next turn. Force your opponents to make hard choices. Remember, unless we have an ability to bring in units on turn 1, too many units in reserves can hurt you more than help you. If my opponent has put close to half of their points in reserves, I know I have a full turn, maybe 2, to take advantage that my army is starting the game with much more power on the board. I will be aggressive to get board control, push all of those reserve units to have to deploy on my opponent's side of the board. They can only come in where we do not have a unit within 9 inches. Use that fact, screen out 9 inches, make your opponent have to deploy a lot of these reserves and their own side of the board. I myself will usually put 1 high threat unit in reserve with a few utility or secondary units as well. This way my army starts the game with lots of power but still has that reserves Rapid Ingress threat. Let's move on to repositions. I want to go over those a little bit as well. What is a reposition? I wanted to cover this in our video since we do cover Custodes a lot here on the channel. The Custodes do have a reposition ability, Golden Light, and some other reposition abilities and stratagems. This will also be good for any faction with a reposition ability, which is pretty much all of them now in at least one of their detachments. A lot of clarification for this rule has came from the Core Rules Update commentary. There's a lot of written stuff here, so bear with me. Reposition units. Some rules enable units to be repositioned by removing them from the battlefield, then setting them back up on the battlefield. Units that use such rules are known as reposition units. The points below always apply to them in addition to any other rules that can affect that unit, such as where they cannot be set up. Note that units that are using rules to embark within or disembark from transports are not reposition units. Our points below, number 1, if used in the movement phase, such rules can be used on units that arrived as reinforcements this phase and can be used on units that have already been selected to move this phase. Rules that are triggered by or applied to reserve units or units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements are also triggered by or applied to reposition units when setting back up. A reposition unit that advanced or fell back in the phase in which it was set back up has still advanced or fallen back in that phase. Otherwise, a reposition unit counts as having made a normal move in the phase in which it was set back up. If a reposition unit is below half strength and it was not on the battlefield during the command phase, it must take a battle shock test as if it were your command phase after it has been set back up. That's an important one right there, so if you do use Golden Light on these Terminators and they are below half strength, when they do come back on the board, we do have to take a battle shock test for them. If a unit is below starting strength, when it is removed from the battlefield to be repositioned, destroyed models are not turned to that unit when it is set back up. Likewise, wounded models in that unit do not regain any lost wounds when they are set back up on the battlefield. So we can't bring up units and bring them back on full strength. They have to come back exactly as they were when they were taken off the battlefield. When a unit is removed from the battlefield to be repositioned, any rules affecting it for the specified duration or under specified circumstances continue to affect it while the duration of those circumstances apply. For example, a unit that is within range of an aura ability, when it is removed, would no longer be affected by that aura if it was set up beyond that aura's ability range. If there's a character with a 6-inch bubble of -1 to hit or something like that, if we do have the Terminators in that bubble, we pick them up, we bring them back on the board somewhere far away from that 6-inch aura, we would no longer have that -1 to hit. Whereas a unit that was battle shocked when it was removed would still be battle shocked into the start of your next command phase. The last one is we can't use repositions to get around the strategic reserves or reserves restrictions. Another thing to note for the Alaris Terminator's Golden Light ability is that it places the unit into strategic reserves. It does not state the unit needs to return to the battlefield in our next movement phase. Golden Light uses a reposition to take the Alaris off the battlefield. The Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion states that reserve restrictions do not apply to units that were placed in reserves during the battle. This means units with repositions that do not state that they need to be returned in the next movement phase, we can actually hold these units in reserves past turn 3 into turn 4 and even turn 5, which opens up more turns to use one of my favorite stratagems, Rapid Ingress. You can see here in the bottom right hand corner, any reserve units that have not arrived on the battlefield by the end of the third battle round count as having been destroyed, as do any units embarked with them, excluding units placed into strategic reserves during battle. So if you started a unit on the board, you use a reposition move to pick it up, to put it back in reserves, you can actually hold on to that till turn 4, turn 5. There's a lot of different things you can do with Golden Light and other reposition moves. I also want to go over the Q&A from the core rules updates and commentary. These should help clear up some of the other questions we may have about reserves. Do units in reserves meet the requirements for being eligible to shoot? Answer, yes. Units in reserves are eligible to shoot. However, unless one model in the unit has an eligible target for one or more of its ranged weapons, that model's unit cannot be selected to shoot. So what it's saying here is yes, you are eligible to shoot if you are in strategic reserves, but you need to actually have line of sight to do it. And if you're in reserves, you're off the board, you're not going to have line of sight. I think this is just for making stratagems work when you come in from strategic reserves. Next question is, when a unit is set up on the battlefield from reserves, is it unable to move for the rest of the phase? Can such a unit make use of an ability in another phase to let them move? The answer is yes. For an example, we do have that Tau stratagem that allows us to shoot and then phase, so you can bring a unit out of reserves in your movement phase and then still use that fire and fade stratagem on that unit. The next question, if a unit is in reserves and some of our models in that unit have the deep strike ability, but not all the models have it, can that unit be set up on the battlefield using the deep strike ability when arriving from reserves? The answer is no. Your entire unit needs to have the deep strike ability. Question, if a unit from your army has a rule that allows it to be set up on the battlefield from reserves in the first battle round, can that unit be set up in the reinforcement step of your opponent's phase using the Rapid Ingress Stratagem? The answer is yes, unless that rule states that it applies in your movement phase, in which case it is prevented by the restrictions of the out of phase rules. The next few questions are about large model bases and aircraft, something we don't really use a lot of. If you do use those, feel free to pause the video and take a read through those. Those questions and answers would be in the third column here. I will release a video on the channel that does go more in depth of the different tactics and strategies that we can do for Rapid Ingress. For this video, I wanted to clarify a lot of these rules so you can start using these rules to your advantage. I hope this video cleared up any questions about reserves, deep strike, rapid ingress, and repositions. If I have missed anything or you do have any questions, throw it down in the comments. I usually try my best to answer in the comments. We are building a helpful and positive community up here on the channel. There are lots of my fellow 10,000 who will answer your questions even before I get to them. Awesome, I love to see it. This video started as an idea to cover how rapid ingress worked. It grew into this from your comments and suggestions for this video. Thank you for the help. Subscribe for weekly battle reports, list videos, and other Warhammer 40K content. Like always, thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by.